vital infrastructure. You think of power grids or water lines, but it's also a flooded out place that made most of America's IV fluid.
Marketplace Morning Report is supported by Amazon Business, focused on offering smart business buying solutions, leaving time to focus on growth. More at AmazonBusiness.com. And by Rubrik. When cyber attacks put businesses at risk, Rubrik provides the power to bounce back fast. More at Rubrik.com.
I'm David Brancaccio. There is a shortage of drip into your arm IV fluid, forcing many hospitals around the country to conserve or in some cases postpone operations. A factory in North Carolina was flooded during Hurricane Helene. Marketplace's Elizabeth Troval has more on why the supply of what starts as a sterile salt and water solution was so vulnerable.
The Baxter International plant in North Carolina didn't just make IV fluid, it made roughly 2/3 of all the IV fluid in the country, says Dr. Chris DiRienzo with the American Hospital Association.
A product like IV fluids is almost like having water to your house. You need tons, like literal tons of this fluid in America's largest hospitals every day.
The short supply of fluids has had a ripple effect nationwide, in some cases prompting postponed procedures.
We've seen these conservation efforts begin, and they're now taking root from coast to coast and border to border.
And making IV fluid is a little more complex than mixing salt and water or making masks during a pandemic. Dr. Lauren Source is with the Society of Critical Care Medicine and works at a hospital in Chicago.
We saw companies transition over to making PPE, which is a much easier transition for companies to make masks and gloves and gowns than it is to make IV fluids that need to be sterile and have specific, for lack of a better word, recipes.
She says while hospitals are having difficult conversations about who gets access to limited IV fluids, with vulnerable critical care patients, there's no ruling out fatal consequences.
If hospitals cannot get their hands on IV fluids to mix the important drugs that need to be given, then I would imagine that there would be the potential for that.
So if IV fluids are so critical, why is this supply chain so fragile in the first place? Rob Hanfield is with North Carolina State University.
Healthcare is traditionally very price focused. If the margins are very low, not a lot of people want to go into that business.
He says because it's not very profitable, there are few U.S. producers, and IV fluids aren't easy to import.
They're heavy, they're bulky, and they don't cost a lot. So you tend to produce them in the same country where they require, those bags and where they're being distributed.
The North Carolina plant will likely take months to get up and running. For now, the government is taking emergency measures to backfill the broken supply chain, including temporary permission from the FDA to import IV fluids from factories abroad. I'm Elizabeth Troval for Marketplace.
S&P futures are up 0.5%. NASDAQ futures are up 1% now. And the number of people signing up for unemployment benefits ticked down in the last week. Generally an upbeat sign, but maybe distorted by the hurricanes. There's also news just now. Retail sales went up by more than expected, up 0.4% in September. On this subject of learning from retail sales, a story on what you put on your skin telling us about the vibe of consumers. Ulta Beauty reported its quarterly results. Here's Marketplace's Stephanie Hughes.
Face masks, hair masks. During pandemic lockdowns, we couldn't get enough of them. And then when those lockdowns ended, we wanted to buy makeup again.
You're now coming to a time where, all of that is slowing.
Kelly Crago is an analyst at Citi. She says now demand for products like masks and mascara is normalizing, which has meant lower growth for retailers like Ulta. And it now faces more competition to sell those things, says Dylan Carden, an analyst at William Blair.
You've got Sephora that's opened up stores in Kohl's. You've got Off-Price, TJ Maxx in particular is increasingly talking about their beauty opportunity. And you've got online migration.
To counter that competition, Ulta is opening 200 new stores over the next 3 years. Carden says beauty products have historically been purchased IRL, and people are getting interested in what Ulta's selling at a younger age, says Citi's Kelly Crago.
There's examples of, teenagers that are caring about wearing sunscreen every day on their face. It's a lot more in their DNA to be caring about that stuff than, I was when I was that age or probably you.
Sun safety is good for everyone, and it's especially good for the retailers who sell us the sunscreen. I'm Stephanie Hughes for Marketplace.
Marketplace Morning Report is supported by C3 Generative AI. C3 Generative AI enables rapid access to secure, traceable, hallucination-free insights from enterprise systems, all while using any LLM, helping enterprises turn the invisible into the obvious. C3.ai. This is Enterprise AI. And by JLL, a commercial real estate leader helping business sustainability with ROI of up to 175%. JLL.com. JLL. See a brighter way.
You know how bank ads end with the announcer, member FDIC. The Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation will give you up to $250,000 of your dollars back if your bank goes belly up. The FDIC gets into the news when banks fall apart, as with Silicon Valley Signature and First Republic about a year and a half ago. The FDIC brass meets in D.C. today. Marketplace's Nancy Marshall-Genzer has more on where deposit insurance money comes from.
The money in the Deposit Insurance Fund comes mainly from banks. They're required to make quarterly payments to the FDIC, kind of like insurance premiums. The fund earns interest by investing in things like treasury bonds. The fund is backed by the full faith and credit of the U.S. government, meaning it can turn to the Treasury Department or Federal Reserve if it's depleted during a crisis. Former FDIC Chairman Bill Isaacs says that's what happened during the savings and loan crisis of the 1980s, when some banks took big risks and didn't survive.
Sometimes the failure is just too much, and you've got to protect the markets. You can't cause panics.
The Federal Reserve estimates the savings and loan crisis ended up costing taxpayers as much as $124 billion. After that, Congress passed some major reform legislation. Now, big banks typically pay more into the Deposit Insurance Fund. So do banks taking more risk. Columbia Law School professor Catherine Judge says it's kind of like car insurance.
If you've gotten into multiple accidents, you're going to pay a lot more for your car insurance because you're seen to be a riskier driver.
The FDIC can also charge banks an extra premium when it has to pay out to protect depositors, like it did after the failure of Silicon Valley Bank last year. I'm Nancy Marshall-Genzer for Marketplace.
I'm David Brancaccio. You're listening to the Marketplace Morning Report from APM, American Public Media.